Okay, well, welcome to the April edition of our Pathways to Macro Alumni Speaker Series. My name's Michael Lynch, and I'm a clinical faculty at the school. And I have the pleasure of introducing Jen Dunning. Jen is the Deputy Director of Government Relations for the New York State Department of State. Jen has had various roles since graduation, many in the political arena. Here are some notable ways in which Jen has served. Um, she served as the District Officer Director for New York State Assemblymember Sean Ryan, the Chief of Staff for New York State Assemblywoman Karen McMahon. She's also been a Western New York regional rep for Governors Cuomo and Hochul. And finally, she's also served as a field educator for a long time. So I will begin to share my screen, turn it over to Jen, and then we will open it up for questions at the end. So could everyone hear me okay? All right.
Great. Well, I'm
What?
happy to be here. I'm very excited. I was very happy to be, asked to participate in this because graduating from the UB School of Social Work was, was and has been a major part of how I have developed as a professional and as a person. I just saw an article this week that named UB School of Social Work. They were ranked number 13th, overall, and I definitely agree with that sentiment. Although if I had to rank them, they would be number one. I still keep in contact with a lot of my cohort and some of my professors as well, who have been, my mentors and my, guided me along the way since I graduated in 2009. And I'm representing an old sweatshirt that I pulled out that I actually borrowed from a friend who's on the call today and who will not be getting it back. So there's that. But this is fun for me, like a pathway to social or a pathway to politics through social work. I never intended this to happen. In grad school, I was definitely set on medical social work, and that's what I was going to do, and that's where I was going to thrive, and that's where I was going to retire, and that's why all the things. But that didn't happen. And it's kind of an interesting journey of how I actually got there. So I'm glad to be able to tell my journey, because I wish that, I understood that, being a professional, and particularly in this line of work, it's not linear. It's very fluid, and there's so many opportunities, and social workers are thought of very highly and across the board. So I'm a very proud social worker. I don't take that title lightly, and I bring it to my work and my home practice every day. So what do I do now? So I work for the Department of State, which is actually very different from the actual US Department of State. I didn't actually know that until recently, but it's one of the oldest and most diverse agencies in state government. They work to make New York State a more welcoming, equitable, and a prosperous place. Our mission at the Department of State is to provide a better quality of life and expand opportunities for all New Yorkers by fostering community revitalization, catalyzing economic growth through business formation, protecting consumers. Sorry, let me pull mine up. Helping new Americans and supporting local government. We assist individuals and families to achieve upward economic mobility and ensure safety and integrity through the regulations of the licensed occupations and development of building standard code. So it's a little bit of a potpourri of everything. A lot of folk, when in doubt, reach out to the Department of State and ask, where they can go to get help. And we typically are able to guide them in the right direction, if not a part of the department. As my title currently, it's new. I actually was appointed by the current Secretary of State, Robert Rodriguez, last July. And I had met him through my work as a regional rep um, for the governor, and we developed a rapport. And when I decided that I wanted to, move on from my position as a regional rep, I was able to connect with the secretary, who kind of opened up this whole new door for me and let me decide what I wanted to do. So, by book, as the deputy director of intergovernment affairs, I'm the second point of contact for state and local elected officials, as well as special interest groups who request assistance within department. So I do have a director, and so it's he and I, his name is Justin. He's really actually, it's kind of, we kind of work great because as a social worker, I want to be involved and I want to be out and I want to be talking to people and I want to call people. So I'm kind of that person, and he's kind of the office guy. He's based out in Albany, but a lot of folks call him they call us the yin and the yang, because I'm very involved, and I'm very I do a lot of hands on. So my role is resolving constituents inquiries, answering questions about department programs and regulations, which there's so many of, and assisting in legislative initiatives that are being proposed or have been intact by law. So there's a lot of policy involved. There's a lot of organizational portion involved. So it's a lot of answering questions or getting a question answered. Additionally, I serve as the department's liaison between agencies when multi-agencies response is needed. So if we, for example, next week, the secretary is going to be in Buffalo for a forum on his downtown revitalization and New York Forward efforts. And with that, we work with Empire State Development and other, agencies within the, New York State that kind of build on each other to make this program work. So I kind of am the liaison to the other departments and agencies, and I, facilitate communication and connection. How the heck did I get here? I actually really enjoyed this story of how I got here. As I mentioned at the beginning, I got my associates at Niagara County Community College. I actually graduated from high school in 1999, and I didn't start getting my college degrees until 2007, because I went to UB as a freshman right after high school with the intentions of being an occupational therapist. So I went to UB and I started taking classes there, but it didn't fit. I didn't feel like I was actually getting what I was looking for in regards to, hands-on or caring or, service to others. So I took some time to figure out what I wanted to do. And then I decided, why don't I just go into the human service? Well, actually, my mom suggested it. She was like, why don't you just go into the human service field and, start with just getting your associates at the community college. I was like, okay, I was like, that worked. And immediately I was like, this is me. This is who I want to be. This is what I want to do. And then I understood through the associate program that there was a bachelor's program of social work that you can obtain. And then when I decided, when I graduated from community college, I went to Buffalo State University, and I thrived there. I really enjoyed it. I was an older student, not old, but I was an older student. I wasn't just fresh out of high school anymore. I was determined. I kind of had an idea of this is the career path that I want to go on, and this is what I want to be successful at. so I had the privilege of interning at the VA administration in the Women's Wellness Center, which was very foundational in what I still think about today as administration and like caregiving, and also like service to the public, because it was a I worked with Faith Hoffman, who it was also on. She's a professor. She was a professor or associate professor at UB, but she also I'm very still close. I'm close to her now, and she was she was the director of the Women's Wellness Center, which helped women, with various types of combat related issues, military sexual trauma, domestic violence, addiction, PTSD, traumatic brain injury. So I really, got my feet wet, and she really kind of let me kind of open up. Like she really gave me room to move, and it was that was a great experience. And then after I graduated from Buffalo State, obviously, the next step, it was UB. And I got accepted into the advanced standing program. The first couple months in the summer was pretty hard. That was one of the hardest 2 months school wise that I had ever experienced, and it was humbling, I would say, because I came in thinking that, it was going to be a breeze, but it was really intense, and it really, focused on research, and it really focused on, I it was really focused on, things that I never even considered. So I kind of, opened my expand of how to think about things. I interned at Roswell Park during my internship, which was also a really great experience. Again, at a hospital, thinking that I was going to go into medical social work. I worked in the leukemia and lymphoma departments at Roswell, or I interned there, and I really got even more experience, with the medical social work field, and uh, going through classes related to like community health and like, all basically medical kind of relations to social work. So when I graduated, I thought for sure that I was going to get a job right away, right? Like I thought for sure that, somebody was going to pick me up. But it took a little while. And so I had a little time to, just research things. Like had time to like look around and like um with my time volunteer my time, which I never really had time before, because between school and work it was really like kind of difficult. So I ended up getting a per diem job at Haven House, which is a domestic violence shelter. I think it's still up and running. It was a really unique job. I was a shelter worker, and I would work evening shifts and weekend shifts, at the shelter, just help caring for, the folks who were the clients that were living there, and like doing intakes. And it was really just a great experience, which I learned a lot from. And during that time, I was also, in search of a job, and I ended up, I didn't even put this on here. I ended up getting a job at hospice. So I was able to finally use all the experience I had at the VA and Roswell, and really put it to use. And I was really excited about that. So I think I was working per diem still, and then I started working at hospice. And it was really just kind of, as my first real professional job, it was very, humbling. I mean, working with, folks and families, at the end stages of their life was pretty, remarkable that I was allowed to do that. And it really, it had, set it was just very transformational in my career. And but I was still kind of feeling like I was still itching to do more. Like I really loved the job at hospice, and I'm actually really good friends with my supervisor, who I was with last night from hospice back, when 2010, so 15 years we've been friends. But she even mentioned that like I, always wanted to be doing a little bit more. I was always kind of like not pushing the boundaries, but like just kind of like, you know, trying to like see what else was out there. So at that time, I started just on Facebook, saying I think I might have like put something on Facebook saying like, I'm looking for volunteer activities, outside of work, and I want to, be helpful to my community. I want to, be a part of it. And then I got a response from assemblyman at the time, Sam Hoyt, who, his office was in the neighborhood I lived in, the Elmwood Village at the time. So he said, "Hey, why don't you just come and help hang out, do some office interning, in your spare time. It's a great opportunity to learn government." But also with that, he was running for reelection, so he was like, "There's two sides. You can start, helping out on our political campaign." I had no idea what any of that meant, but I was like, okay, I'll try it. So I started working at his uh, government office whenever I could. I actually gave up the per diem job at Haven House because I really enjoyed going to the government office. He was working on I don't remember specifically, but it was like a school reform. He was working on at the time keeping Children's Hospital on Hodge, which was a huge thing back then. And then there was a few other, events or like things that he was working on that I actually think back now and I'm like, well, those are pretty huge. Legalizing gay marriage, that was pretty. I mean, it happened a little bit later, but that was going on at the time as well. Um, so I was kind of doing the balancing because I was really loving what I was doing at hospice, but I also was really starting to really enjoy this government thing. And I knew that, the politics of it was going to start, but I didn't know the separation of how the government and politics works. It's very separate. You have to keep it very, it, you have to keep it very separate in in general because government is different than politics. Although sometimes they seem the same to some people, it's very different, and it's very important that folks keep it separate. If you're working in government, that you keep your work in government separated from politics. I'm sure you guys all aware of that. But so I was still working at hospice and still interning at the assemblyman's office. And then the political season started coming, and they asked me, well, he asked me to show up to a political headquarters for a campaign meeting. And really not knowing anybody or anything about a political campaign, let alone like how the government works, I showed up and I sat there. I didn't know a soul. I was very awkward, and but I I fell in love with it, and I just kept showing up. And I showed up, and they started getting me more involved. Like I would go door to door, or I would make phone calls. And the fact that I just kept showing up showed them that I was committed and interested in, these campaigns, which wasn't just for a reelection campaign. There was like multiple organizations who were running campaigns in one organization. So they were called like the Good Neighbor Democrats, which kind of still exists. And it consisted of Sean Ryan, David Rivera. Sean Ryan is now a state senator who was an assemblyman. Councilman David Rivera, the previous deputy county executive Maria White, who was also on the legislature, and a few John Rivera, who's now the assembly member, and a few younger folks like Mitch Nowakowski, who was my intern actually, who's now a council member on the on Buffalo City Council. So it was kind of like a group of like-minded politicians working together to get reelected into their government office. And I kind of became part of that family. And, at that time when I was still at hospice, and I was still working at Assemblyman Hoyt's office, he was actually considered, he was resigning. He was not going to get reelected. And the assembly member, Sean Ryan, was, campaigning to become that assembly member in that seat. And it was a special election because Sam had resigned. So that campaign was working along on as well as Maria White, who was running for county clerk. So I kind of veered towards her campaign because as a woman, I thought she was awesome, and she was like very energetic. She was smart. She was welcoming. She trusted my word because I was a social worker. Like she like really she really like took me in. So I spent the almost the entire summer kind of working on her campaign. First, kind of just being her driver, which I would just take her places, but then she kind of brought me in more, and I became her volunteer coordinator, and I would gather volunteers weekly for functions or for going door to door or call banks or whatever the campaign needed. So I was working on that, but I was also I was the assemblyman Sean Ryan was kind of in the mix there too. So we were all kind of working together. So I kind of really got to know him during that time. I had no my brain wasn't even like at the point where like I was like, oh, I'll just go work for the government. No, I had a really good job at hospice and I loved what I was doing. So I was like, really satisfied with the fact that I was, doing what I love professionally, but also, fulfilling this void that I had, like, to help the community as a whole, as a social worker, because that's what we like to do. So, eventually, the election had happened. Maria White unfortunately lost her election, which is, I'm gonna knock on wood, is the only election that since I've been involved in politics has lost that I worked on, which I think was a good experience for me because I had no idea, how things worked. Like I was so green, and I didn't know how. Like I don't like. I didn't know. I didn't know how government worked. I didn't really know that there was a difference between government politics. I had no idea. So she lost her race, and Sean, the assembly member, he won. So it was great. It was like cool. Like, all right, unfortunately, the person that I was campaigning for did not make it, but a part of our team did, which it should be celebrated. So we were all pretty happy. And at one point, he I was he called, he asked me if I wanted to get coffee, which was fine, which was normal. Like, we had all been kind of working together. We'd all grab breakfast or whatever. We'd all talk about like our week, what we're gonna do. So I didn't really think anything of it, but I ended up going into his office and me sitting down and he offering me a job. And he specifically saying he wanted me because I was a social worker. And I said to him, I was like, I don't know anything about state government. Like, I don't know how it works. I don't know anything. And I'm just learning what politics is. And he's like, I don't care. He was like, I think you're an asset and I want you on my team and we'll learn together. So that's kind of how I got into his office. And I was as the first employee hired. So it was just, him and I trying to figure out how state government worked because he came from private practice. He, worked at Cush, and then he's also an attorney. So, and the reason why he got into politics was he wanted, I don't know if anybody knows that street on Elmwood Ave where the two, I think it's Ashland and like maybe Bird or something, where they go different ways instead of like one way. So he was the reason why that street is like that because there was like traffic issues or something. Anyways, so he didn't really have like a seated experience in government either. and we kind of just learned and grew together. And I was with him for 9 years. Uh, uh, I learned the legislative process. I learned the budget process. Um, I look back, like I don't think I understood how much I was learning over those 9 years I was with him in the assembly until I, left to become the chief of staff for Karen McMahon. But it's a lot, there's so many but it all kind of goes back to like this social work foundation of just making people's lives better, you know, doing what we think that to do to make our lives better. So I started working for Sean, and again, 9 years I was with Sean, and Sean is a great friend of mine still. I talk to him almost every day, and he's a great mentor. I like to say that he was my boss first. Uh, 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 my annoying little brother, and now he's my friend. So we have a great relationship, and he calls me and bounces things off of me. He would call and like ask me questions when I worked in the executive chamber. Like it's really a fun dynamic now that like he's not my boss because we're colleagues, and he really takes what I have to say to heart, and he really takes time to like we really take time to understand each other, and it's kind of cool. So, but after 9 years of working together, I think we both needed a change, and so we both decided together that I would move on. But I was so scared because that was I mean I was in a line of work that uh, uh, I didn't I didn't go to school for. I didn't plan to be as my career, and I was scared. What am I going to do? Like, where am I going to go? And it just aligned that at that time, Karen McMahon, who's now the assemblywoman for Amherst and Williamsville, she had won her election, and she was very new to the whole process and was looking for a seasoned staffer as her chief of staff, and it kind of the stars lined up, and Sean and I had a conversation with Karen, and by the end of the conversation, it was decided that I was going to be the one that helps her with that transition into state government, which was also kind of just very neat. Like, I'm just like Jen Dunning. Like, I'm just, it was very, so I worked with her for a year. I was planning on being there for a while, but during the duration of time that I worked with her, which wasn't long, I got her through her first assembly session. Uh, 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 I got called by the executive chamber by then Governor Cuomo to ask me to join his administration as his Western New York regional rep. And it did not take me long to decide that that was probably the best thing for me to do professionally. It's a very demanding job. It's very consuming. It's 24/7, holidays, weekends. But I felt like it was probably one of the most, it was probably the best decision for me politically or professionally if I want to continue in working with state government or in this line of work. I had a brief thought of going back to social work, but you get this bug, you get this government bug in you, and kind of like when you have a running bug, but so you you're stuck. So I started working for Governor Cuomo in 2019, 4 months before COVID hit. So I was new to the executive chamber, and I was new to that executive office, trying to figure out my role as a regional rep, which is very fluid and very demanding and very time consuming. So during my time so I got hired in October 2019, and then COVID hit in March 2020. So the whole administration went into COVID mode, COVID response mode. And I was a part of the Western New York COVID task force that was led by now Governor Hochul, who was responsible for, the rephrasing, the reopening phases, the multi-cluster strategy, the mask mandates, the state mandates, the school mandates. And in addition to those, the executive orders, we were responsible for setting up vaccination clinics. I spent 75 days straight at Harriman Hall at UB running the COVID vaccination site, which was highly successful and very just kind of so, something that I never thought I would ever have to do, something that I never really thought I would be qualified to do, and something that we did, and we really did successfully. I mean, we vaccinated over, almost 200,000 folks, ranging from, 5-year-olds to, elderly. So we did that. And also before the vaccination sites, our team in Western Europe was responsible for, setting up the testing sites at Niagara Community College and down on 95 Perry at at the executive chamber office downtown and here in Buffalo. So and then, the pop-up sites, and then the rapid testing. So there was all that we were like, kind of thrown into, but we worked as a team, through the different agencies, and then through state, county officials, city, region. Like it was it was a very, again, transformational time in my life as a social worker working in government. I had no idea that, that was going to be something that I could say that I did. So after COVID, after COVID hit, we all kind of know what kind of happened. There was a scandal, and there was a transition in governors. And Governor Hochul was obviously local, and she had been lieutenant governor, for 4 years before Governor Cuomo was resigned. And I had worked with the lieutenant governor when she was lieutenant governor, like at various different ways. I mean, we were in the same building, and it was kind of just an easy transition for me and my team to go from a Governor Cuomo to Governor Hochul, and we kind of just transitioned, and we moved along with her, and a lot of growing pains and working progress, but she's doing good things out there. And during the time that I was with the lieutenant governor as her regional rep, two events occurred that were pivotal to me in my professional life. And one was the blizzard, and then the other one was the mass shooting. The blizzard was very unexpected. We were actually planning maybe for weeks as for just a regular storm. Like, we were on the phone with the Department of Homeland Security here in New York State. We were on the calls constantly with Department of Transportation and the throughways and the park or the New York State Police. It was something that we knew was going to be an issue, but we had no idea to the extent that it was going to turn into the horrific generational storm that it did. So a lot of things changed in our plans very quickly as we adjust from a storm to a blizzard, and just the fact of the matter of the duration of the storm and the intensity of the storm. We had to respond quickly. So under the governor's she appointed Commissioner Jackie Bray of the Department of Homeland Security as kind of like the coordinator of, a multi-agency effort to get a handle on this. Because on Christmas evening, emergency services had to stop responding to calls because they determined it was more dangerous to respond to them than not. And I was up all night on Christmas morning, talking with mayors and, town officials, some of them in tears, like just not knowing what to do. And the fact that we didn't have an answer for them because of such just this intensity of the storm. It was something that I hope nobody ever experiences again. It was traumatic. What could we do at a time where we couldn't do anything? So when the worst of the blizzard passed, it was really just we really went in there to rescue people, to turn on their utilities, to make sure roads were clear, to make sure that folks could get to the hospital if they could. So that was a pretty pivotal moment. I learned a lot, and I learned a lot about how coordination of state, local, and local elected officials and agencies and emergency management all really need to come together and work and just for the cause. And so this is a picture of me briefing the governor, the commissioner who's right behind her of Homeland Security, the commissioner of the Department of Transportation, Marie Dominguez, and then the mayor. So my job, I had to drive out in the blizzard, which was terrifying, to meet the team to kind of go over, what's happening and what they need to deliver to the public as a message or a response, or this is what's happening. So it was very kind of like, it was something, again, I never did. I didn't go to school for that. How do I know that? So there was it's a team effort, obviously. It's not just me. It was definitely a whole team, but I had the job of briefing everybody, which was pretty terrifying in itself, let alone a blizzard happening outside. And then of course, unfortunately, and then the 514 shooting on Jefferson Ave, which was just heartbreaking on many different levels. It was heartbreaking for the fact that, this racist came into our community and, caused complete chaos. It was devastating because we really understood there was a lot of things that, were left to be ignored or forgotten about in Buffalo, East Buffalo. Food security issues, small business development issues, social service issues, just, mental health issues. Like I spent every day there after 514 for a good solid until about July. And I really became part of the neighborhood. There was a few of us on the team that really just kind of invested our time, who we were allowed to, like we were given permission to kind of just be a part of the community. Because I mean, I didn't realize that Tops was the only place that folks were able to get, diapers, or they were able to get good produce without having to go to some, random bodega that, the apples were sitting there for 3 days. So it really, opened my eyes to the fact that this part of our city, which I think is great, was neglected. And I think that really, unfortunately, because of the circumstances that had occurred, all eyes ended up being on East Buffalo, and I'm grateful for that. But it's also, it took such tragedy to get to that point. There was many hugs happening, many tears occurred, and I'll never forget the people I really started to meet, and really, you know, it was just, as we all know, it was just a horrific time in our community's you know timeline. So that after the shooting, uh I started as a person. I started I started to have, I think, effects from all these events that were occurring, and I decided that it probably would be a good time to pivot again and to do something that I still love to do. I love being a public servant. I love waking up. I love helping folks. The calls. I love just being able to connect people, to give them relief, or like help them out. It's ingrained in me. I really love that people can count on me to help them out. So with that, I took a little leave of absence at my time as regional rep, and that's when I started reaching out to colleagues and mentors on what my next step would be, because again, I don't know. Like, that's the thing about where I am in my career. Like, I don't know what's next. Like, I don't have, like, I'm not in a career. I'm not doing social work. I'm not doing therapy. I don't have like a straight career path. But along the way, I've met so many people. I have, networked so many people. I have, done so many things aside from just my regular job. I got involved. I worked on campaigns. I became a finance director for one of the campaigns. I started working on Hillary Clinton's Secretary of State book tour, which led me into her being a delegate for Hillary Clinton. And I became a field supervisor for UB. And then I became a board of trustee member for the Western New York Pride Center. So all these things, in addition to me working, kind of, I built a a little bit of an army of folks who trust and rely on me, and that helped me figure out what my next steps are. And my next step was doing government relations for an agency. So that's how I ended up here. And I think, and all I can say is, like, I never expected to be in the seat that I am. Sometimes, when when people tell me my titles, or we're telling they do say my titles, it kind of, like, it shocks me a little bit, because I'm like, who decided to give me that role? Like, who gave me those titles? But I earned them, and I deserve to have a seat at the table, because I should be. And I think that, along the way, and lessons learned, I have always known what I don't know. I've always been honest with the fact that I, I was, I, at the beginning, I don't know anything about state government. I don't know anything about politics. I don't know anything about the state budget. I don't know how the legislative process works. I don't know anything about a public health crisis. I don't know anything about shootings. Like, I don't know these things, but I am willing to do the work, and be vulnerable enough as a professional to say this. These are the things that I am good at, and I will figure it out along the way with everybody's help as a team, because you don't get anywhere without a team. And I really, my mom always, well, actually, my mom, there's two parts of this quote that I say every day to myself when I wake up. And I also tell this to my son when I drop him off at school. It's lead with kindness and go with grace. So my mom always told me that, just leading with kindness would just get me far. Or it's just like a sense of, like, just be kind. And if you lead with kindness, you'll be followed by kindness, or you'll set a trend for kindness. And I really think that is pivotal in how I work as a professional. It's like, I do my best. I'm not better than anybody else. I don't, just because I have fancy title. It doesn't mean that I am more powerful than you are. I am totally social work, and I meet you at where you're at, and I walk in your shoes together with you. And then go with grace is just kind of be you, be authentically you, and it's okay to be you. Because if you're just you yourself, then I think that just goes a long way. I like to think that I have a little fun with what I do every day. The next slide is a picture of me. Somebody captured it at our election night result party in New York City. And I was with a bunch of the other regional reps throughout the state, and it was just a really great moment. Brought us to that great night of victory. So that's fun. And then this other side photo is just me being helpful by mopping the step and repeat before a press conference, because we all have to jump in and do a part, and that needed to be done, and there was a million other things other people were doing, so I grabbed the mop and jumped on stage and helped out. So and I think it's just part of the great thing. It's just great. And I'm very thankful for all the people that helped me along the way and who continue to help me. And I think it really starts with UB School of Social Work, because I would not be here unless I went through that program.
Thank you, Jen. That was fantastic. I love the picture of you mopping. In a previous session, Jack Kavanaugh had mentioned when students say, what is social work? He says, well, do what I'm doing because I'm a social worker and this is what I do. So sometimes that's, mopping floors. Fantastic presentation. I learned a ton. I can't believe all of the different roles you've played, and I appreciate you mentioning all of the sort of little things you did along the way that helped you get there, including volunteering, showing up, being there, problem solving, even when it wasn't something that you necessarily knew how to do. And I think that's a lot of what we do as social workers. So I'm glad we have a couple minutes left for questions. So I'm hopeful that some of our audience has some questions. So I will turn it over to you all. You can either unmute yourself or raise your hand. Susan.
I'm curious what type of field placements you would recommend for someone to kind of get into this world.
Yeah, so actually, I think I might have been the first field supervisor to supervise somebody in an assembly office. So I had Kate Hilleman, who did the previous session on this, and then Camille Arth, who has her own practice now. So she ended up going into another field, but she was very interested in learning more about political social work. And then Kate obviously went on to become the deputy commissioner of parks. So I would suggest a state election of office. And I know that Senator Ryan takes social workers, obviously. And I know Assemblyman John Rivera takes social workers. Yeah, so I think that that's a good start and to open up doors and to understand things. I just, although I wanted to be a medical social worker, my thoughts now are I probably should have expanded myself or like did something other than what I thought I was going to do, because, that's kind of how doors open. And so, yeah, I would suggest an elected official's office or, a city, a city or a county office who will take interns, especially social workers. Everybody loves social workers.
Thank you. Margie.
This was great, Jen. And I don't know if you remember, but I think I met with you when you were first at Sean Ryan's, and I may have helped develop that placement when you were taking interns.
I do.
Yeah.
I do remember. Yeah.
But this is great. And I also love how, like, there were a couple times you said, I'm not doing social work, but then you sort of step back and said you're a social worker and you were doing social work. And I think that it's really neat how our trajectory as social workers can be very different than what we think when we come into a program like that. And, I would say when you were asking Susan about, what kind of internship should I have, I think Jen is a good example of how even if you don't have the right internship or the one that you think is going to set you up for where you want to be, like look where you can go, right? Like the skills are transferable. And I think you're a good example of that.
That's a really good point. The skills are transferable, and yeah, you can really do anything, especially if you're willing to put in the time as an intern and volunteer and outreach coordinator.
Showing up is important. Showing up and really getting involved, I think, was a tremendous. I mean, it helped me tremendously. Like just showing up.
Yep, passion and interest go a long way, and when people know you're passionate and interested about something, that means a lot.
Yeah.
What other
Sometimes I
questions?
say, I'm not the smartest person in the room, but I will work the hardest. So I don't know.
I have a question. Um, what? So there's, a million TV shows about politics and government. What was your biggest, or what is your biggest surprise, having been in government and politics? And I didn't even think about them separately until you mentioned it. I'm like, oh yeah, that is
Hmm.
true. Like campaigning is different than governing. So what was the biggest surprise that you've had, either, positive or negative?
Um, so I think in government, mine would be the process of getting something done. Um, I understand that folks are often frustrated by government and how it works, but everybody in government, regardless of what side you are on or what you're pushing for, they ultimately want to, I hope in my heart, want to do the right thing. So, just like when, pushing a budget bill or pushing a legislative initiative, it really takes effort and it's not easy. So, even just making the effort of doing those things, I think that was a surprising to me that, it's just not like as simple as, okay, let's come up with an idea, let's vote on it and let's make it into a law. Like no, there's definitely a whole, there's just so much involved. And sometimes it takes a few times before a bill is passed into law. And that's okay because that's, they're what the government is trying to, in my experiences, what we're trying to do is just make something, work for the betterment of, you know, the community or its people or the state of New York. Politics, politics is it's fun. I enjoy politics. I enjoy campaigning. I enjoy the speed of things. I enjoy the competitiveness. Um, I think it's fun. I think it's challenging, and of course you're on a you want victory, you want to win. That drives a lot of folks. The competitiveness, and you can really just have fun with it. It
I
doesn't have
imagine
to be it doesn't have to be dirty all the time.
I imagine the adrenaline of a win can be addicting. You mentioned the bug, but I imagine the rush is really something.
Yeah, even if I learned from Sean Ryan. He said always be confident but never cocky. So I take that along with me too. So if you have, if you're confident, but don't be, cocky. So the win is better. Like, the picture, I love that picture of election night in New York City with my team. Um, because I don't think we were expecting a win. Like, you never really expect to win. Like you're just like, oh, something's gonna happen. You're constantly looking at the numbers. The days before, you're like, oh, what do the polls say? Or you're just constantly like second guessing yourself. But it's really just kind of like such a good feeling when you get that V.
Um, any other final questions as we wrap up? Well, this has been fantastic. I can't wait to get it up on YouTube so that other people can see it. Jen, thank you so much for your time. I know you're extremely busy, so giving us some time to talk about your journey and hopefully inspire some students to follow in your footsteps has been super valuable and meaningful. So on behalf of the school, we are really, really thankful. So thank you so much. I love that you wore your hoodie.
Yep.
And have a nice rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you. And
Thank
I,
you.
thank you for what you guys do for our students and, folks like me.
Great. Thanks. Have a good one.
Bye.